Well, thanks very much indeed for joining me to celebrate the launch of Folly Ditch. It is unbelievably to me the fourth Helen Oddfellow mystery. And it's also 4 years, nearly 4 years since I wrote the first book, Unlawful Things. The first one took about 10 years to write. The second one took about 2 years. And the third and fourth ones have been a little bit quicker. So I hope I'm starting to get the hang of things now. And I'm going to be joined by, or I am joined by, journalist Kathy Oxtoby. Kathy and I used to work together, and Kathy was one of the people who used to listen whilst I banged on in the pub about how I was going to write a book one day and wanted to write novels. So I'm really thrilled that Kathy's agreed to come along and talk with me about the next book. So over to you, Kathy. Are you unmuted and shown all of your in your glory?
There I am. Hi, I hope everybody can hear me okay. First of all, just to let you know that Anna's happy to answer any questions at the end. So if you wanted to type those questions into the chat box, that would be great. And I'd like to start by saying that I absolutely love the Helen Oddfellow series. I'm a big fan. And I think that the latest one, I was lucky to have a preview of the latest one, is Anna's best so far. So on that note, I'd like to ask Anna a few questions about her novels and her latest novel, and a few plans for the future, hopefully, as well, that she can share. So starting off, Anna, what was the inspiration behind the Helen Oddfellow series? And are there any similarities between you? You look very similar on the book, actually. That could be you.
It's not me on the cover. What was the inspiration? Well, I tend to be very inspired by history, and particularly historical places. So places, particularly in London, that you walk through and walk past every day, that packed full of history. It's such an ancient city, and that's really where some of the inspiration for the series started. The first book was kind of prompted by a walk that I did back in 2008 from London to Canterbury. And on the course of that walk over Easter weekend, we walked past a church where the Elizabethan poet Christopher Marlowe, poet and playwright Christopher Marlowe, is buried. And then when we got to Canterbury, 3 days and many blisters later, we discovered that that's actually, he was born in Canterbury. And I don't know, I just sort of got this idea about a secret that Marlowe knew that kind of unwound on the London to Canterbury road, sort of the action kind of unspools on that road. Something to do with something he'd learned growing up in Canterbury and the history of the times and so on. So that was where this kind of spark of an idea came from. And I find that it's very often historical places that give me ideas for something that might have happened in this place. The inspiration for Helen, when I was thinking about, well, I need a sleuth, I need someone to investigate this mystery that I'm creating, and I thought, well, it's got to be someone who knows London pretty well. It's got to be someone who really notices things. It's got to be someone who knows a lot about history and also about literature. And so I invented this sleuth. I had a friend, or still have a friend at the time, Fiona, who is a London tour guide. And it's fantastic going anywhere with Fiona in London, because she notices stuff all the time and points it out and tells all about the history. So I thought, well, that would be a fantastic, a tour guide would make a really interesting sleuth, because they know so much. And I also made her a literary researcher, because obviously I wanted her to find out about Marlowe. So we don't have a huge amount in common. I also made Helen deliberately 6 foot tall, because I thought then no one will think, I'm pretty short, no one will think that Helen is me. But of course, it is the first question people always ask. She's much braver than me. She's much more resourceful than me. She's much taller than me. But admittedly, we share some interests in common.
Any particular you're revealing? Any particular interest?
Well, interest in history and in literature, let's say.
Thank you. What prompted you to focus your latest novel, Folly Ditch, on the author Charles Dickens, and in particular the character Nancy in Oliver Twist?
Well, I've read and enjoyed a lot of Dickens novels over the years, and he's a real London writer. He writes beautifully about the city and about the characters and the politics and all sorts of, about London. And a few years ago, I don't know, maybe I should be careful what I say, but I was starting to notice some parallels between politics at the time and some of Dickens' themes in his novels, and perhaps also between some of the political characters that we have in our current politics and some of the more grotesque villains, shall we say, in Charles Dickens. So I thought, well, that's interesting. So I've been thinking about Dickens quite a lot. And then also I moved from London to Kent, and Dickens also spent a lot of his time living in Kent. People think about him as a London writer, but he lived near Rochester for a long time. And going up and down between London and Kent, as where I live now near Dover, you go past Rochester a lot. So I was sort of going in and visiting Rochester, which is a really interesting city, and just thinking about Dickens quite a bit. And then a lot of people, when I was kind of thinking, I'd done Blake, I'd done Marlowe, and I was thinking, well, who am I going to do next? And so Dickens was definitely in there. And a lot of people, a lot of novels have been written about his later years. So the love affair that he had, and then also his great unfinished novel, Edwin Drood, which is set in Canterbury. And so I thought about that for a bit and thought, is there something there? And then I thought, well, it's been a bit done. And I was rereading a biography of Dickens and noticed that apparently he told his friend that Nancy in Oliver Twist was based on a real person, on someone he actually knew. I thought, well, that's interesting. And no one seemed to know who that was. So that kind of got me thinking, oh, well, maybe there's something there.
And why the particular character Nancy from Oliver Twist? Why the focusing on her in the novel?
Just because I thought that was interesting, that the idea of her being based on a real person, because she doesn't. That's the other thing. She doesn't seem very real to me when I read the novel. And again, I read the novel thinking, oh, I'm rereading it. And then I realized I'm not. I'm reading it for the first time. I've seen the musical, I've seen the films, I've seen the TV adaptations. I don't think I'd ever actually read the novel. She's very melodramatic in the novel. Yeah. And I thought, that's, how can that be a real person? So that then just got me thinking, well, what might Nancy's story be? And yeah, then I'm off down a rabbit hole.
So your novels have a lot of historical detail. How do you go about researching your novels?
I suppose, like I said, when I first start thinking about a particular figure, which is usually a writer, obviously I read a lot of their work, I read a lot about them, a lot of biographies, histories of the time, that sort of thing. But I also kind of go and hang out where they hung out as well. So I spent a lot of time, places like the Dickens House Museum in London, which is a fantastic museum. Go visit, it's really good fun. But also just sort of mooching around the streets that Dickens wrote about, and also the marshes in North Kent, where he set a lot of his books. And they're so atmospheric, and I kind of like to go somewhere and sort of soak up the atmosphere a bit and then start to imagine scenes that I might set there. But then some of it is more sort of, specific historical research. So once I've got the book underway and I know what I need to find out, I'll go and find things. So, for example, without giving away any spoilers, there was a point at which I realised I was going to need to know a fair bit about early 19th century theatre. And I discovered that the University of Kent has a collection of theatrical ephemera, so playbills and prompt books and all, posters, all sorts of things. So I just wrote to them and said, can I come and have a look? And I had a lovely rummage through their archive, and that was really helpful. And that's kind of nice to do because, of course, Helen's a researcher as well. So I quite often use not just what I find in the archives, but the experience of going to this particular archive, and then I'll write a scene set in the archive that I visited, which is quite good fun, about Helen discovering things.
So there's a lot of research going on there, as well as the writing process. There's the digging out all the bits of history to make your novels authoritative and ring true.
Well, I hope so. Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I really enjoy the research. I think I'm perhaps a bit of a frustrated historian, and to be honest, research is much easier than writing books. So it's it's quite tempting just to spend all my time in the library.
So I remember when I first read your very first novel, I was a bit surprised, because some parts of, well, all your novels actually feature quite graphic violence, kidnapping, murder. There's a fair bit of blood and death. So how do you feel about writing those particular scenes? Because when us knowing each other all these years, you didn't strike me as somebody that was that bloodthirsty.
Not a violent type. It's always the quiet ones. I suppose now when I'm actually writing them, I'm writing them very much, it's a technical challenge like any other scene. So I'm thinking about the impact, the staging of them, and so on. But I do have kind of a few rules when I'm writing about violence. And one is that I really try not to do it gratuitously. If there's violence, it's there because it needs to be there. It should be there. It's there for a reason. And also there are consequences. So there are some crime books in particular which seem to kind of revel in the gory detail, almost sort of for its own sake, and to be quite kind of titillating. I don't like that, and I try not to do that. You talk about it being sort of shocking and frightening. Well, it is. For most of us, violence really is something that comes out of the, it's not something we encounter every day. It is very shocking. It is really frightening. And that's because most of us don't use it. Once we're adults and we've stopped fighting with our siblings or whatever, we're grown-ups. We don't resort to violence. But there are some people who do, and I'm really interested in what pushes you over that line. And once you're over it, what does that do to you? Does it make it easier to do it again? I guess it does. And yeah, so it's one of those things. I'm not interested in a hero who, has a kind of cartoon attitude to violence, where they can kill somebody and then sort of walk away with a James Bond style quip and sort of as if nothing's happened. If someone's hurt, it matters. It's important. So I guess
I think that really comes through with all of your novels, when you put Helen in some really horrible situations, poor Helen. But you do feel for her, and you do very carefully write and talk about the impact that what she's been witnessing and experiencing has had on her.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. I'm talking again about the sort of technical side of it. I mean, on a slightly lighter note, I do occasionally rope Phil in, my husband, and say, come here, stand with your back to me, turn around quickly. And if I had a knife in my right hand, where would that end up? So I never actually stab him, but yeah, we do occasionally just sort of act things out so I can block it out of my head.
Just moving on to a few more personal questions now. What book are you reading at the moment?
Well, I am reading the poetry of Federico Garcia Lorca, and also a biography about him. He's a Spanish poet from Granada, and I spent a lot of time in Granada earlier this year, and that might give you a little bit of a hint as to where Helen might be going next.
If you could go back to any time in history, obviously you're able to do that with your characters, but if you had some kind of time machine and could go back anywhere, where would you go in history and why?
Right. Well, this is a lovely question. First of all, if I had to stay there, if I had to live there, I don't think I would go anywhere before the current day, because that would just be really scary. If I'm allowed to visit, that's a different thing. If I'm allowed to visit, I would like to go back to the Globe Theatre or the Rose Theatre during the 16th century, about the time that Marlowe and Shakespeare's plays were first being performed. And I'd like to be a groundling in theatre and see what really went on, you know, during the first staging of Macbeth or something like that. I think that would be fascinating. Or possibly with Granada, go back to the kind of mid 15th century, I think it was, when the sultans were ruling Granada, the last great sultan. They were, you know, building the Alhambra. But I'm only going if I can go disguised as a man, because I don't want to end up in someone's harem. That would be a disaster.
Can you give us any hints then about plans for what your next book's going to be? I appreciate it's a bit early when you've only just launched this one, but any little hints you can give us about what your next plans are?
Well, I think I've already started to give those away, perhaps. Yeah, I'm certainly thinking about Granada, and we were lucky enough to spend most of January in that town in Andalusia in southern Spain. I didn't go to research a book, but I was just captivated by it. It's full of layer upon layer of history and all sorts of mysteries. So another research trip really beckons, I think.
And just finally, Anna, how can people find out more about your books, buying your books?
Well, finding out more, probably best to go to my website, which is annasaburnlane.com. Buying the books, you can order them from any bookshop. You can buy them on Amazon. So if you just go to amazon.co.uk and put in my name, you can find them there. The ebook is exclusive to Amazon for the next 3 months, and then it will probably be opened up more widely after that. But for technical reasons, that's got to be the case for now.
Okay, Anna, well, that's all my questions. Thank you very, very much indeed for talking us through those questions. It's been really insightful.
Thank you very much, Kathy. That's fabulous. I'm just going to read quickly a little bit from the opening of Folly Ditch. One sec. Paxton raised his binoculars and peered into the darkness of the English Channel. His boots dug into the scrappy turf close to the edge of the cliff. The wind flung handfuls of sleet at his face. Far below, huge waves churned the shingle of the beach. It was a rough night for a crossing. He could pick out a few vessels at sea. 2 small fishing boats bumped along close to the shore, a massive container ship, festooned with lights like a leftover Christmas tree, anchored up inside the Goodwin Sands to ride out the storm. A boy, flashing red, warned of the hidden sandbanks beneath. Bastard weather. He couldn't afford for it to be late. At the bottom of the cliff blazed the port of Dover, gantries and docks floodlit. Lorries lined up in the big car park snaking around the site. Men in high-vis jackets with clipboards stood stoic in the filthy sleet. It was all fixed, he'd been told, so long as they arrived before the shift change at 9. And then he could see it, emerging from the darkness. The first ferry of the day steamed towards the port. Paxton checked his watch. It docked in 15 minutes, then maybe another half hour for the lorries to disembark. Hardly any private cars. Early January wasn't the time for a jaunt to France, and the hassle of travelling these days put most people off. Except for the illegals in their ragged inflatables, and there wouldn't be any of those today. Anyone stupid enough to try would be dead before they got out of French waters. There was something to be said for a storm. Paxton stashed the binoculars away and stuck his hands deep in his pockets. He watched the ferry power through the waves until it reached the calm waters inside the harbour wall. Time to go. He trudged to the minibus and checked his phone. A message from a number he didn't recognise. Docking now, and a registration, Dutch by the look of it. He drove along the winding roads past the mighty fortification of Dover Castle, stone walls standing like iron. The lay-by was a good one, by the Whitfield Business Park, but away from the CCTV cameras, screened by scrubby trees and bushes. Lorries used to wait up here for the ferry, but since Brexit, most of the freight was routed along the M20. There were still signs, though. Bottles of urine littered the hedges, fast food wrappers tangled in the branches of the trees. People had no pride. Kent, toilet of England. What was wrong with them all? He waited. Paxton was good at waiting, turned off the engine, couldn't afford to waste petrol. An hour later, with the sky lightening as far as it was going to, a truck turned off the roundabout. Big Arctic refrigerated unit. He checked the registration. That was the one. The driver jumped out, baseball cap low over his eyes, and checked for cameras. He ran to the back of the truck, cut through the customs seal, shifted the bolts, and flung the doors open. Paxton heard shouting in some language he didn't know, German or Dutch or whatever. A rabble of people climbed down. They looked in a bad way. 3 men first, heaving tatty nylon sports bags and rucksacks stuffed with God knows what. Paxton frowned. They'd been told to bring the bare minimum. Their faces were weathered, heavily lined, and they wore cheap-looking leather jackets and jeans. One took out a tin of tobacco and started rolling a cigarette. "No," shouted the driver, shooing them towards Paxton. "You go now." Paxton stepped out and opened the back of the minibus. "Come on then. This way, ladies and gents. I'm Gary. I'm taking you to the quarantine centre." "All right." Thank you very much. So we have one more thing to do this evening, and that is tonight's giveaway. And we're going to give you a chance to win a signed copy of Folly Ditch to the first person who can write the answer to this question in the chat box. So fingers at the ready. And the question is, what was the name of Bill Sikes' dog in Oliver Twist? Anybody know? Helen, it wasn't sad. He was sad. Yes, well done, Fiona and Andy. I think that was first. Sorry, Jenny, just pipped to the post. Okay, that's great. So I think it was Fiona and Andy who went first. Phil will double check that. But if you could email me your address at hello@annasaburnlane.com, and we'll get the book off to you. I'm really happy to answer any questions if there are any in the chat box. Let's just have a look if we got any questions there. Lots of people saying bullseye. Okay. Can you tell me about the new covers, and have I thought about writing a book about Crystal Palace, and is the book on sale now? 3 excellent questions. New covers. Yeah, I decided I really like the cover of Folly Ditch. I hope you do too. And when I was relaunching it, I thought I really wanted to have very what's the word? Sort of impactful cover for Folly Ditch, and I started working with a new designer, and she did all of the covers for me. So the new books now all have all 4 of the books have kind of matching covers, and they've all got this this lady with the red coat or red jacket from the back against the backdrop of wherever the book is set. So I think it gives it a bit more of a bit more impact, and perhaps it tells you a little bit more about the book itself, puts it more in the genre as well. Yes, the book is on sale now, and if you go to Amazon or to my website, you can see the details for that, so please do. And another quick plug, anyone who does buy the book, read the book, please do leave a review on whichever site you use to post your reviews. You can post on Amazon, you can post on Goodreads. It's just really nice to be able to see people's reviews. I love that. What else have we got? Crystal Palace. Maybe one day. I mean, you know, never say never. The reason hasn't come up yet. If it's Rachel, isn't it? Rachel, if you can find me a really exciting writer who lives in Crystal Palace or lived in Crystal Palace or set a reason to set the book there, then yes, why not? Why not? Crystal Palace is where I live when I'm not living near Dover. Do I have more than one book going at once? Not really. I probably ought to. I think proper authors do. I mean, before it gets published, certainly I start getting, usually what happens is I finish the first draft or of a book, and then I start getting ideas for the second one. Yeah, I don't really start writing it until the one in progress is kind of out the way. I can't quite get my head in that place before that. Why would Helen go to Granada? Well, why not? You know, it's an exciting place. But there is a very old university in Granada, and she is a university lecturer, so there might be reasons there. Who would play Helen in the TV adaptation? Oh, gosh. I don't know. What do you think? Has anyone got any ideas? You can unmute yourself and tell us. Let's think. Who would play her? I really don't know. I really don't know.
Nicola Walker.
Say it again, Chris.
Nicola Walker.
Nicola Walker. I don't know who she is, but I'm sure she'd be great.
She's got a very expressive face.
Excellent. Okay. Arthur Conan Doyle and Raymond Chandler apparently came from Crystal Palace. So who knew that? That's great. How old's Helen? She's mid-30s. I do keep a track of exactly how old she is. She started off mid-30s. She started off about 34, I think 33, 34. And it's now 6 years on. So hang on, so she must, yeah, she's about 38, 39. I do have a spreadsheet that has all this stuff on it, so I remember how old people are. Great. Okay. Not tall enough. Oh, sorry. How about Helena Bonham Carter? Maybe too old. I don't know. No, she'd be good. She'd be great. Anyhow, I think perhaps we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for coming. Before we go, can we just turn it into gallery view so we can see everybody, which would be really nice. And if you're happy to be on screen, then come and say hello and give us a wave so I can see your lovely faces. Hello.